What does an early 20th century American short story, the moral panic over rock and roll in the 80s, and furries have in common? If you said Canadian animation company Nelvana, you're absolutely right. Confused? Good. Because this is the weird tale of how this Canadian animation company created two cult classics that involve rock and roll, demons, and are surprisingly furry. The first is a 25-minute quote-unquote Halloween special entitled The Devil and Daniel Mouse. The second is the 1983 feature film Rock and Roll, a high-budget film featuring the musical talents of Cheap Trick, Iggy Pop, Lou Reed, Debbie Harry of Blondie, and Earth, Wind and Fire? Strap yourselves in for a review double feature blast from the past. The Devil and Daniel Mouse and Rock and Roll.
How about you?
I sold my soul to the devil.
Yeah? What?
So what's the big deal? An animation company makes two features back to back. They're both furry, they feature rock and roll, demonic imagery. It's not like they're the same story or anything. Well, both movies start in a rundown nightclub where a band is playing to an audience of one. A pale-haired antagonist with a penchant for demonic imagery takes interest in the only female member of the band, who, by the way, is blonde and drawn with clearly defined lips. Antagonist separates the female lead from the male lead to further a musical career. The drummers are fat, the bassists are skinny, a concert is crashed by a demonic entity where the female lead is performing in a white dress showing cleavage, and the day is saved by singing a remix of a song from the beginning and the power of technicalities. The end. Okay. But outside of those points, they're two entirely different stories, both by way of mood, setting, and takeaway theme. The Devil and Daniel Mouse is based off the short story The Devil and Daniel Webster, written by American author Stephen Vincent Benet. The original story is about how a New England lawyer named Daniel Webster provides legal defense for a farmer named Jabez Stone in order to win Jabez's soul back from the devil. This piece of Americana has made its way into American folklore conscience and has been adapted to film and television specials.
And the starting line of the 1976 Philadelphia Flyers.
So what's the Canadian furry adaptation like? Well, the short starts off in a seedy little music club in some random town in the woods. Daniel and Jan are performing, but their luck runs out when the club owner decides to update his venue, leaving the performers in dire straits. Daniel decides to go pawn his guitar, leaving Jan alone in the woods. Jan lemons her position and says she would give anything to be a rock star. And we know what this means in stories. Sweet Lion Jesus, it's Donald Trump! So the devil and his sycophant, a weasel named Wheeze Weasel, yes, that's literally his name. Anyways, they show up to strike a bargain with Jan. She hurriedly signs and is whisked away before Daniel shows up with about a month's worth of instant noodles. Wheeze takes Jan back to the studio, and after a costume change from a zoot suit into whatever the hell this is, he summons a band out of the ether. This is actually a pretty fun sequence. I mean, look how the drummer shows up.
I know a drummer.
You got him!
And the guitarist. And the bassist. Wait, no, he literally just shows up out of nowhere. They don't even bother to make him poof on screen like the other two, he's just there. Anyways, Wheeze chases Daniel off, and Jan takes her summoned band on a meteoric rise to the top. Jan gets a bit mopey after all the fame gets to her head, and she starts thinking about Daniel. Daniel tries to show up, but is shooed away again by Wheeze, just before Jan can figure out what's going on. Finally, Jan is invited to Frontline, a brand new music festival. She attends and goes through so many genres of 70s music we aren't sure what exactly she's going for. I mean, she starts the act off with a Kiss parody.
Sometimes I is and sometimes I ain't. Just sweet love, honey, gonna make me think.
She wraps up her performance with a heartfelt ballad, where she basically pours out the fact that in spite of her fame, she's missing love. Again, pining for Daniel.
It all means nothing. Can you help me find my song? It used to be here, whispering right in my ear. Can you help me find my? Can you help me find my? Can you help me find my song?
And who should show up but the devil, come to collect his due. Jan runs into the woods and is eventually caught. While the devil tries to take her to hell, she mentions that, yes, it's not in fact midnight, so the contract isn't up.
Technicalities, always technicalities.
The devil begrudgingly gives her a reprieve, and she goes to find help. But, wouldn't you know it, the band isn't going to help her. The bass is saying something about her not paying union dues or something like that. Having given up all hope, she goes back to the woods, where she runs into Daniel, just simply having a jam session out in the woods. The hippie. So after a real touching moment, the two try and catch up, and we get one of the funniest moments in the whole damn short.
What have you been doing?
Traveling around, writing songs. How about you?
I sold my soul to the devil.
Yeah? What?
Daniel decides to help Jan stand up against the devil, demanding a fair trial because they live in a democratic forest. And it's about this time that the whole town comes out of the woods. Seriously, did like the entire town just decide to go hide out there? Finding this idea amusing, the devil agrees on a few conditions.
On 3 conditions. 1, I supply the jury.
That's not fair.
Fair schmear, take it or leave it.
Okay, you're jury.
2, I supply the judge.
Okay.
3, if you lose, I get both of you.
Daniel agrees to these conditions and the stage is set. Now, in the original short story, when the devil calls forth the judge and the jurors, it's basically a who's who of villains from New England history.
Remember him, no doubt. Captain Kidd, he killed men for gold. Simon Girty, the renegade, he burned men for gold. Governor Dale, he broke men on the wheel. Walter Butler, king of the massacre, Peach the cutthroat. Morton, the vicious lawyer.
And the starting line of the 1976 Philadelphia Flyers.
Now, this doesn't really adapt well to the democratic forests of Canada, so our jury is some slapdash music industry people who are about as thin as their see-through forms.
Call the jury.
First juror. It's your rat. He owned a record company that cheated its singers. Second juror.
Who's that?
S. Leach. He was an agent who bled his singers dry. Third juror.
Who's that?
Vicky Viper. She was a big star until she lost her voice.
And the starting line of the 1976.
Wait, Ron Animated Special. The trial is rushed. Daniel has 3 chances to find some case to plead why the contract is no good. And he gets cheered on by... the bassist? Wait, hold up. This rabbit, who gets a fairly good amount of screen time, is the voice of the band, and outside of his beaver boyfriend, is the only one with spoken lines, and yet he just shows up off screen when the band is summoned from the ether? Seriously, guys, how hard would it have been? Anyways, back to the trial. Daniel eventually stumbles across the fact that the jury only has 3 people, and the case can't actually proceed, so BL pulls some crazy shadow clone jutsu stuff to fill the box.
That is a technicality. No one cheats the devil on a technicality.
In the original short story, Daniel Webster manages to save his client's soul through the power of baseball, apple pie, and Murica. No, seriously, his counter-argument is literally just, you should let him go 'cause America. And somehow this wins? In the short, Daniel decides to use the power of folk music to sway the judge, jury, and all the forest animals. And wouldn't you know it, it's the same song that our protagonist played in the nightclub. Except this time it's backed by a band, who just happen to have everything set up for an impromptu concert in the woods. This does a good enough job that actual summoned demons can't help but jam out. Judge Wheeze and the jury rules in favor of Jan. BL throws a theatrical Sakuga-worthy hissy fit and pulls the jury and Wheeze back into the depths of hell.
So, I gave you a chance, and you beat the devil. Well, I've learned my lesson. From now on, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
The moral of this story? Daniel and Jen were naive and tried to make a band work with just an acoustic guitar and an auto harp. What they really needed was a beaver percussionist, a rabbit boyfriend bassist, and a mantis on rhythm guitar. Wait, that's not the moral? Then what is? Oh yeah, this thing. I mean, it's a bit better than America, but it sounds kind of like the bad advice you get when you're suffering from depression. First, let's discuss character designs. The main characters are well drawn and convey emotion very well. BL's design is really good, especially considering the effort they put into his animation. And the use of the limited palette choice works well. It's kind of nice to see a devil character not dressed entirely in red or black. The background characters, well, they look like background characters. You know, these guys are so steeped in 70s art, they couldn't get any more 70s if there was a reference to the first Star Wars movie. I mean, the skunk manager's suit is literally a nod to Saturday Night Fever. And look at that hair! The animation overall is pretty good. While some sequences have wonky bits, like this extended frame of Jan's reaction, there are other scenes that have really good technical animation. I mean, we're going into Sakuga territory with Beelzebub here. Especially when you consider this was done before computer-aided animation, this entire thing was done by hand. The major strong point of this short is definitely the music. It did its best to cover popular genres of the time, including folk, disco, ballads, and rock and roll. It's also got this really good feel-good vibe for a movie that's essentially about making a deal with the devil and getting away with it. In 1979, Nelvana would begin production on a film that would take 4 years and cost them the modern equivalent of 17.7 million Canadian dollars, or 13.2 million US dollars. This would become the first Canadian feature-length film produced in English. This film is the cult classic Rock and Roll, or Ring of Power, depending on your market. The movie starts off with intro credits, so 80s you can practically feel the dark synth. After firmly establishing that the movie takes place in post-nuclear apocalyptia, the rock superstar Mock is shown cruising the town looking for that one voice he needs for his super secret project. He pulls up to a little place called Mylar's. Back in the dressing room, Angel and Omar are preparing to perform. They agree that if given the opportunity to sing 2 songs, one of them will be one Angel wrote herself. The band goes on with a rock number that really doesn't fly over well with the owner. I can't imagine why. Under threat of violence, the band goes on for Angel to sing her ballad. And who shows up but Mock, who finds out that Angel has the magical MacGuffin voice he needs. Meanwhile, after the show, Angel and Omar have a little fight about how it went down. Omar admits that Angel is good, and that he's actually kind of jealous and a bit impatient. He wants to be famous now. Mock extends an invitation for the band to visit. They accept and arrive at the mansion, and they're led in by the NHL team of post-apocalyptia, the roller skating Schlepper Brothers. I mean, why else are they constantly on roller skates? Anywho, after sitting around watching music videos, Mock shows up in the most flashy villain way possible. Well, hell yeah, I'll have a beer with an introduction like that. Mock drugs the band and takes Angel on a trippy walk through the garden. She consistently rejects Mock's offer to leave the band. We also find Mock's petty reason for trying to tap into this other dimension: his waning popularity. So yes, he's literally only doing it for the views. So Mock kidnaps Angel while the band is drugged and sends the boys crashing down the hill into a public fountain. When Omar snaps out of his drug-induced haze, Mock has moved the tour to New York. Clever naming. Omar and the band decide to head to New York to see if they can't find Angel and ask her what's up. But not before they're stopped by a police officer who's probably had one too many dozen donuts. They make their escape in the police car and head to New York. Cue the road trip montage. When they arrive in New York, they're stopped by a guard who blocks them from entering. After Omar fails his deception check, they are arrested and thrown in jail. Meanwhile, back at Mock's place, Angel runs into Cinderella. Cindy is the little sister of the Schlepper brothers. She's basically Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun mixed with the body of a linebacker. She helps Angel break out of Mock's complex to go clubbing. They choose to escape in the most 80s action movie way possible, through the air ducts. On the way out of the complex, Angel discovers Mock's petty vengeance plan, and the MacGuffin needed to fix the issue. Note, this will be important later. Cut to a tattoo shop. After being bailed out of jail, the band find out through Dizzy's aunt that the best way back into Mock's compound is to find Cindy, whose only defining feature is a tattoo. Not the fact that she's built like a defensive lineman, not the fact that she's blonde or literally runs around on roller skates all the time. Nope, they're sent on a magical quest to find a woman and the only clue is a butt tattoo. The previous client lets the Schlepper brothers know where the band is going and is murdered for his trouble. But enough about that. Let's check out the discotheque of the future. Oh, and let's also play a game of Spot the Canadian. So Cindy takes Angel to a booth, and it's about this time that the band enters looking for Cinderella's tattoo. By the time they find her, the Schlepper brothers find them and start capturing all of them. Omar eventually follows them out of the club, and in the foggy night they run into Angel, who seems really comfortable hanging out with Mock. Surprise! This Angel is a mutant lookalike hired by Mock for some twisted mind games. Mock then proceeds to use the band as a bargaining chip to get Angel to sing for the concert. Angel agrees, and Mock sends the brain-fried band away. Angel tries to explain that what she's doing is to save them, but they're literally too stoned out of their mind to notice. So Angel sings at Mock's concert in New York, and they show a little bit of what happened without fully pulling the curtain back.
Survivors describe the destruction as evil, spooky, and wow, bad karma man.
And while it devastates the concert hall, the being didn't materialize. Mock learns he needs more power to pull this demon into his dimension, and that ohmTown power plant should have just the right energy he needs for his diabolical plan. We also have this downtime moment where one of the Schlepper brothers, Zip, has a bit of an existential crisis, spurred on by a children's television show he watches, and actively questions whether what they're doing is good or evil.
Hey, boss, can you tell the difference between good and evil?
Are we the baddies?
But enough about that. Cut to a scene where Angel decides to try and seduce Mock to keep him from bringing the demon into the world and finishing his plan. When she's rejected, she stands up to him and flat out tells him that he needs her and that this plan is nothing without her. Mock freaks out and decides to force Angel to sing and prepares for the concert. We cut to a quick scene with the boys and yep, they're still brain fried. So back to the concert. Mock attempts to summon the demon, but the power isn't quite enough. Luckily, there's a lightning storm which causes a power surge in all of ohmTown. This surge manages to snap the boys back out of their brain-fried state, where they decide to go rescue Angel by stealing a cop car. Again. So the concert continues with amazing visual effects while the band crashes in, just as the demon is summoned. Mock is totally reveling in his evil plan. Just as Angel is about to get eaten by the demon, Omar jumps in to save the day as best as a barbarian can. He breaks Angel loose from her binds and is about to be struck down by the demon when Zip steps in the way, taking the fatal blow. Angel decides that the only way to defeat the demon is for her to sing the demon back.
If I can sing it up, I can sing it back.
Just before she's consumed by the demon, Omar jumps in with a duet, driving the demon back because technicalities. Mach freaks out and tries to resummon the demon, but is stopped by Toad, who pulls a Return of the Jedi and throws Mach back into the Hell Portal. He struggles at the edge of the Hell Portal, realizing that technicality had bested him. Once again, the day is saved. The band finishes up with an awesome concert, and all's well that ends well. The design choices for this movie are interesting. It sort of has this goofy movie if it was made in the 80s aesthetic. The characters are animated very well with great expressions, and part of this is due to the fact that they are inspired by the performances of rock vocalists. My only problem is Omar. His head-on design isn't too bad, but every time he turns his face, sweet lion Jesus, his face is like 50% nose. It's like getting sent one of those Nigel Thornberry gifts. Whose design choice was this? It looks like if you strapped a party hat to a guy's face and went, "Yep, that's it. That's what we want the male lead to look like. This is the face we want the audience to stare at consistently." Oddly enough, depending on which country you were in, you would actually get different versions. The Canadian release features different voice actors, extra scenes, more profanity, and a better audio mix. In the American release, the profanities were cut out, and they specifically included an addition to the title sequence, which is pretty much a "this is why they're anther animals," pretty much like every YouTuber that makes a "Am I a furry?" video. In the Canadian version, the voice of the male lead Omar is Greg Salata. In the US, he's voiced by Paul Amat. Honestly, it kind of repaints Omar in a different light. Salata's Omar has this Brooklyn rage voice that would make Jolie Wheeler swoon. But the delivery on some of the lines comes off as harsher, sharper, and frankly kind of makes Omar a bit more of an ass, if that's possible. Lamott's Omar seems to have more nuance. Yes, he's a jerk, but he also comes off as empathetic. Like, he may not be comfortable with sharing his emotions, but he definitely cares about those around him. While a few scenes are different, the one I really want to talk about is the climax. In the American version, Zip is dead. In the Canadian version, Zip just wakes up and everything's okay. Honestly, at this point, I will have to side with the American version on this one. I mean, Zip being alright in the end's all well and good, and it makes the happy ending sweeter, but it sort of weakens the whole divine sacrifice trope, with his death not being a permanent thing. Initially, the feel of the story was supposed to be a bit more fairy tale, cutesy. As the creators put it, softer and fuzzier. Eventually, they were convinced to go down a more adult route. During the early development, a lot of the basic story concepts of the final product were decided on, such as the use of anthropomorphic animals, the post-apocalyptic setting, the villain Mach using Angel to summon a demon, but other things would change in the production. Initially, Mach's plan had him turning Angel into a guitar and playing her to summon forth the demon. So why did this cult classic bomb at the box office? Well, to explain this, we have to go back in time to the 1980s. Turns out this movie was only shown in a few select theaters. This was due in part to both the satanic panic, fear of anything involving demons, and the fear that showing an animation with drugs, sex, and rock and roll would cause a moral outrage. Now, drugs, sex, and rock and roll were not new to mainstream theatrical animation, but the socio-political environment when this movie was released was the same one that led to the belief that Dungeons & Dragons was the gateway to devil worship. Parents were also getting outraged at rock lyrics, to the point where eventually there was a congressional hearing about it. So even a PG-rated film could come under scrutiny. This choice only to release in a select few theaters proved to be a disastrous financial choice. Nelvana nearly went bankrupt after producing this movie, and it would take a bunch of magical bears with laser beams coming out of their belly tattoos to make the money back. Yep, that's right, Care Bears saved Nelvana from bankruptcy. Rock and Roll did have a brief stint in the home video department when it was released on VHS and Laserdisc. After this limited run, the only way you could get a copy of this movie was to actually write Nelvana and ask for a copy. This would cost you a whopping $80, which is roughly about $200 today's standard. So if this film had a limited showing in theaters, a brief release on home video, and was prohibitively expensive afterwards, how did it become such a cult classic? Why, by the power of nerd pirates! Bootleg copies of the film were being sold at comic conventions. This actually made the film more acceptable to a wider audience. Considering the timeline, this could have been one of those films that made its way into furry room parties in the 80s. Overall, this movie is a fun sci-fi furry rock opera with some great animation, and much like the special it's based on, the music really sells it. I would highly recommend you check this out if you can. It's actually available on Amazon Prime if you don't want to spend... yeah, I guess I'll never learn.